Thanks to LL Bean for presenting today's storybook with limited commercial interruption.
How was your morning?
All my life, changing every day, in every possible way. In every possible way.
Walking around orchards makes me very happy. Just the life and the bounty of it. You get to see months and months of labor kind of translate. And the kind of commitment to growing these, especially here where you're growing such a diversity of fruit. It'd be really easy just to grow the traditional apples everyone kind of knows, but to really commit yourself to growing these weird exotic varieties is quite special. To make an apple on a tree, you've got the apple species or type of tree that's there, and then you have a bee from another tree that comes over and having touched that tree and pollinates the apple. So the apple, the seeds in there will be a cross of those two. And so when that seed goes into the ground, it will not be like its parents. So compared to humans, apples have so much more genetic diversity to them in every seed that you could plant a really small red apple and get a massive green apple. You could plant like an early season apple and get a late season apple. So just the diversity is incredible and unlike any other fruit. I mean, pears do this too, but that's really it. Because of this diversity, a lot of people who think they have something actually have a unique tree. They might have an old tree that's actually what we call a seedling tree, that is a unique apple that only lives on their property. Only if it's grafted is it one of these older varieties they might have. And what that means is that you take an existing apple tree called a rootstock, and you basically cut open a little piece and you take a splicing of a new tree that you want and connect them. How we have Macintosh, for example, is there was one original Macintosh tree. And then someone liked it and they gave Cyanwood these little cuttings to their friends and their friends' friends, and kind of like a network built out. And so you go from one Macintosh tree to thousands, to tens of thousands, to millions. But they're all basically clones of that original tree. That's how we make apples. That's how this orchard exists. These are all apples that have been found elsewhere and now are grown here by grafting.
I started as a humble apple picker. I worked on and off for the previous owner, Royal Wentworth, and he retired. He was 76 years old.
And then we heard that this place was for sale, and we were with some friends and decided it sounded like a really good idea to try farming. So we bought a farm.
And we've been here since 1974. We're tired, but not tired of apples. We're worn out. We made a lot of rookie mistakes. The previous owner was a man of very few words. He was a very sweet guy, but he didn't impart a lot of wisdom. I think he wanted us to learn on our own pace, and it took us quite a few years before we felt like natural at it.
If you come during the weekend, we do wagon rides, and on some days people can go in and watch cider being made, watch the donuts being made. Kids love to come. We do take them on a wagon ride. We teach them how to pick apples, how to respect the tree, how to respect the apples. They remember it. They'll remember it 3 years, 4 years later. They'll tell us about the apples. Well, this is how you do it. This is how you pick an apple. It's awesome. The barn, there was a big fire. There used to be a big house here and it burned to the ground. All the barns burned. And they built that. And when we bought the place, it was storage. And we decided it looked nice as a store. So we've been adding, and we let a lot of people use it as an outlet for their crafts. We have a lot of vendors in there. So that's almost all of the stuff on the sides is craftspeople. It gives all the people in the neighborhood sort of an outlet that I let them take care of it. This is your spot, which is lovely. It's good for me and it's good for them.
Well, these Cortlands were planted by Royal's father, Henry, in 1916, when they still were a numbered variety. They came from Geneva, New York. They're a cross between the McIntosh and the Ben Davis. It was a year or two after they were planted that they were named Cortland.
There's trees here dating back over 100 years, and it's one of the best places to visit and actually pick a lot of these historic varieties. At some point in US history, there were roughly 10,000 different apple varieties grown. When I say 10,000 varieties, these are people on farms, in small towns across the United States, growing things from seed. Some of them taste terrible, some of them taste great. Keeping what tastes great, sharing with their friends what tastes great, and that's where our varieties come from. Even within Maine, there are several dozen apples that have been quote unquote lost that people are still trying to find. Apple trees will live up to be 200 years old, so it is still possible to find some of them.
The apple farm, I think, was designed for something like a pandemic because we're pretty much socially isolated out here. People who just wanted to get out and they were able to come here and be outside and not worry about the virus. So it didn't really hurt us severely economically.
Until November, when we had to close up the barn, which is wide open, because normally I'd move down into a little building, but I couldn't do it because I couldn't have people in the little building. So we just had to shut and do just wholesale. A lot more cooking going on. How do I make applesauce? I mean, that's really, you never learned how to make applesauce? There are a lot of people that don't. So let's start from that. We gave away a lot of recipes. We talked to a lot of people. You know, it was a learning experience.
One thing that's really interesting now, especially with climate change, is the need to kind of go back to how apple trees were grown 100, 200 years ago. So a lot of apple orchards are grown on rootstock that's only meant to live about 25 years. So you'll get fruit really quickly, which is good if you're a commercial grower because you need to sell your apples. But the bad thing is the apple trees will die, and also they're very susceptible to things like drought. So if you have a bad year or two, those apple trees will just keel over. So one thing that people are starting to do, which is very time intensive, is use what's called standard rootstock. Standard rootstock won't produce fruit for 7, 8, 9 years, but that tree could live to be 150, 200 years old. It's deep enough roots it can survive droughts, major pest issues, and so people are trying to figure out, with the changing climate, is how to keep these apples alive. So the other piece of this is some older varieties that were abandoned 100 years ago might be perfectly suited to what Maine looks like now in terms of the climate. Something that gets lost when you have a McIntosh or a Red Delicious is that there's different apples for different purposes. What people don't understand is a lot of apples they have easy access to don't actually translate that well when cooked. So baking with a McIntosh, you'll just basically get applesauce in a pie. Whereas if you're using the right apples, you'll have this firm, crisp texture. Same thing with making cider. There's just apples that are meant for those purposes, but they're not the ones that are widely available. So places like this, kind of saving them and having them, making them available for more people is a very big deal.
Whatever apple is at its peak at the time is the best, and I like most all of them. There's one or two that I don't care for, but
we won't say which ones.
And I love them cooked in any way, you know, apple pie or apple crisp.
Since every seed is a new apple species, the idea of fruit exploring and foraging is really interesting and exciting because you're on the cutting edge. You know, the thing you find might be the next Mac or Cortland. You have to be willing to bite into some apples and spit them out, but every so often you'll find one that's perfect for cooking, for fresh eating, for baking, for cider production. But the only way to do it is to bite into those apples and see how they taste.